Hi, everybody, and welcome once again to Your City, Your County. We're making this program on July 12th, 2023, and we have as our guest today a good friend, I hope, until I see you in the squad car.
Even then.
Okay, I hope so. The Kewaunee County Sheriff, Matt Joski. Matt, it's so good to see you.
No, pleasure to be here, Bob. Thanks for inviting me.
It's always a pleasure to have you here, and you always fill us in on good things, whether it be your work in the military or your work as the sheriff. So, thank you for being here today. I've been reading a lot lately in various places about the jail situation in Kewaunee County, and I thought we'd probably want to cover that maybe first of all. Let's get the rough work out of the way here, and we'll see what you have to say.
Absolutely. We'll try to keep this brief but get as detailed as we can. So as everybody is aware, this has really been sort of an issue in this county for well over 2 decades. A lot of people know the history. It was attempted to be addressed back in the 90s, didn't move forward, so we've kind of left stagnant for a few years. And about 8 years ago, we said, okay, we need to move forward on this matter. So it has been almost 8 years of planning, moving forward with various committees, involvement, collaboration, trying to move this forward to see what is the best solution for Kewaunee County. And ultimately, through all of these studies, through all of these committee meetings, we've arrived at, of course, the best solution is to once and for all move past the current facility, which is at this time the oldest and the smallest in the state of Wisconsin, which in and of itself wouldn't be the issue, but it was built in 1968 with the designs of 1968, with the codes of 1968, and our best efforts to try to remedy that are just impractical. I mean, it's got a floor plan that is based on designs that are no longer practical and downright unsafe. There's actually a report when we brought in the first study committee. It was a national resource, National Institute of Corrections. They looked at everything we're doing. They looked at that facility and they made the statement, what you're doing here is undefendable. This facility that you're trying to operate is undefendable. The potential for liability and risk, either safety of your staff, safety of the inmates that we're obligated to house, this is not defendable. And that's a big statement.
So if somebody were to get hurt or fall or a wall fall on them or something, you guys would be responsible for that, and the whole county would be, I would think.
And we always are, right? Anytime a city organization, county organization, we all have an inherent level of risk. But when you're embarking upon this and you've been told by those people who are in the industry that this is not satisfactory, you take on an additional level of that liability because now you know, right? When you've been told that, hey, this needs to be updated, it's no longer safe in regards to the linear construction, the blind spots, the narrow passages. I mean, we could go on. So, going back to the original statement is that after all the study, we said, okay, we need to move on. We need to move past that structure. And the decision was made, let's build a new facility on green space. That new facility will allow for the maximum efficiency operationally. That's important because a lot of people are hung up on the bricks and mortar of this project. That's a one-time cost that will get retired after a certain period of time. But if we don't do it right and we incur ongoing operational costs, staffing and the like, now that goes on perpetually. That never ends. So I'm very proud of the work that we've done, and we've created a facility that has maximized our efficiency both in staffing and operational costs that we can then realize and benefit from as the years go on. Also, someday down the road, we are going to bring the sheriff's department over to that building. Someday that courthouse, there's going to have to be addressed, right? That building will not last forever. We've created a footprint. We've created a plan for our children and our grandchildren to be able to say, wow, they laid the groundwork. They set the table for the decisions we now have to make in 2060 or in 2070, right? As leaders, we have to look past our own era. Right? There's that old saying that a wise man is one who plants a tree under which the shade they will never enjoy. And that's kind of what we're doing with this project. We're trying to lay the groundwork for future generations that they can expand, they can grow, they can add to it, and not have to be encumbered by the existing footprints, by the existing limitations of blocks. We're trying to look big picture.
Yeah. So you have the land.
Yeah.
And then part of it will be where the jail is, and then whenever somebody says, well, it's time to move your office,
Right.
the sheriff's office in, there's a place for that.
Right.
And that will connect to this, and then the courthouse will be or the courts or whatever
Right.
is deemed at that time will fit right in.
Sure.
So you don't have to walk down a skinny little, path or something
Yep.
like that to get from one to the other.
So again, it's all about long-term
Plans are
vision.
there.
This isn't something that's going to happen in, these additions in, 5 years or 10 years. I mean, we're literally looking down the road 20 years, 30 years. And I think it's our obligation to look that far down the road and not just say, well, we're just going to take care of it in our time. We're just going to deal with the issues in our time. That's just short-sightedness. So I'm very proud of the work we've done in trying to create a phased approach to the various needs. Right now, the need is the jail, right? The need wasn't the sheriff's department. I would love to be up at that building, but you know what? I'm okay in the basement of the courthouse for now. It's fine. But someday, in a phased approach, we can move in that direction. Again, it won't be me. I'll long since been gone, and that's okay. But at least we'll know that we set the groundwork. So, we brought along this far, and we're doing well. The issue that we're hitting up against now, and really it's in anything that we do in this world, is inflation. So last year, about this exact same time, they voted to move forward without a referendum. And that was a solid decision, because a referendum's great if you've got options. Or, you can put it to a referendum, and if it fails, you can say, okay, let's go to a different option. We don't have any options, right? We have painted ourselves in a corner over the last 30 years that our options are limited. So I'm glad they made that decision. But now, since that last year and the planning we've been doing to get this ready for bids, unfortunately, inflation has taken hold, and now this project is at 33 million versus the 27 that we were, at just a year ago. So you can see how inflation's eating us up. The good news is that in the recent bids, these bids are now locked in. So now that we've got these bids that came back, yes, it's more than what we predicted years ago, but now they're locked. So long as we make a decision and move forward, we, for the first time, have some solid secured numbers.
How long are the bids good for?
So there are 45 days. That's going to expire shortly after the board's vote next week. So they vote next week, Tuesday, and just a few days later, those bids are going to expire, and then we're back into the race of inflation. So I'm very hopeful and I'm optimistic that they're going to realize it's time to put our feet in the ground. It's time to plant a flag, and let's get this project moving with solid numbers that we can secure.
And I know from talking to you in the past, there were, the plan was bigger, and the plan has shrunk over the years. And I don't mean that it's gotten worse or there's more problems with it, but you've said, well, we can do without this, or we can do without that. It'll still be a good process. It'll still be a good building, but it'll be a little smaller because we're saving money.
Right, and then each one of these meetings we had the state jail inspector right there at the table. And when we looked at making cuts, we'd look over to her and say, are we still good? In regards to code, in regards to Department of Corrections standards, are we still good? And she'd say, yes. And sometimes we take it too far. We'd say, hey, we want to cut this. And she'd say, nope, you can't cut that. Right, now you're taking it too far, and now Department of Corrections, you're in violation of some of the requirements and mandates. So that's that fine line that we've been navigating for the last years. We've been really trying to refine this project to absolute necessity. Absolute necessity. And I'm very proud of that as well. And I think we all should be, all the county board members that have been part of this, citizens, community members, that we've really taken a look at this and sharpened pencils every time we came together.
And I think it's good what you just mentioned, that you had this expert from the state. That's her job, to be sure what needs to be done and what's required.
Right. So again, I'm very proud, and I'm optimistic that the county board, again, having been part of this all these years, that they're on board, they understand it. But I hope that the community can appreciate and support them in this difficult decision. This isn't an easy decision. Nobody's arriving at this decision easily. We all get it. This is real money. This is real impact to our taxpayers, but this is a project that has been lingering far too long, and we owe it to this generation as well as next generations to move this thing forward and, for once and for all, put this issue at rest.
If you don't do this, if this shouldn't pass, then I'm sure the state or somebody would be coming in and saying, wait a minute, you've got to do this.
So every year we get an annual building inspection by the state Department of Corrections, and every year our inspector, Nancy, who's a wonderful lady, has said, this isn't suitable, but I understand you're working your way towards compliance. So I'm going to give you some leeway here. And we've been doing that for years, where she's like, I don't like the way this is being done, but I understand you're trying to work your way to something better. So if this weren't to go, And I'd have to give her that call the next morning saying, it's not going anywhere. We're stuck in this building. All of these leniencies that have been afforded to us over the last 20 years, that's all going to come raining down now. Say, okay, you're no longer moving in that direction. Now it's time that we, unfortunately, the Department of Corrections has to play the heavy and say, here's all the codes that we've been allowing you to vary from because we've been working together. Well, now you're saying this is going to be your facility into the future. Let's get it up to par. And that would truly be a waste of taxpayer resources. Because no matter how much money we throw at it, I mean, the old analogy of lipstick on a pig, that's what this would be. You would be throwing money after money at this building and never solve the underlying issues.
Yes, I get you. How does this affect as far as taxes go?
Yep. So we look at some of the options that are before them. I mean, we had the original plan when those bids came back, and that had approximately a 35-cent increase on the bids, right? So that remains in place. I'm sorry, it was 20. So the original one back in 2022, when they moved forward, was 20 cents on 1,000. Then when these new ones came back at 33, we brought it up to 35. That's significant. So we've got two other options that are at play. And a lot of this has to do with the amazing work that the county has done in creating fund balances. We've been saving money, holding back on different expenditures, and we've got some fund balances. So by being able to dip into some of these fund balances, we can minimize that increase to possibly only incurring another $1 million of actual debt. So that's 5 cents. So compared to what they had approved last year, we're talking about 5 cents of an increase on $1,000 assessed value. So we're not talking huge amounts. You know, we've done our best to keep this as minimal as possible without, and the other worry is we don't want to dip in too deep into those fund balances because we want to always make sure, just like in your household budget, you've got some rainy day money. You know, so we've got to find a balance there. But what we're really talking about, if they went with this option C, which is basically incurring another $1 million in debt to get this project moving forward, it's 5 cents. 5 cents on $1,000 assessment.
Well, it doesn't sound like much, but I know everybody's watching their money, so, well, we hope that that's something digestible for the county board to do that. And when this is done, we can say that Kewaunee County has gone from having the smallest, the oldest jail to having the newest jail.
Well, and even the most important part is we can now start to have conversations about programming for addiction, programming for mental health, actually being able to make some life-changing impacts on those that are in our jail. Because right now all we're doing is we're just channeling people. And we talk about recidivism rates, why people reoffend. This all plays into mental health, addiction, drug addiction, alcohol addiction. Now in this new facility, we've planned for these spaces. We've planned for the ability to make some of these things work so we can actually change lives. Because my goal is that nobody goes to jail.
Yeah.
But unless we make some life-impactful choices, unless we're able to impact some life choices while they're in our jail, even if it's only for 30 days, we may not change completely, but we can plant the seeds. We can start to change behavior. Now we're making some inroads in this community.
That's great. That's one thing I'd never considered. You know, I know we've talked about this many times, but the fact that your people are getting a different option maybe with their lives, that's wonderful.
Right.
I mean, who can beat that? And I know you and I have talked about, you know, your bicycle situation with kids and all kinds of things like that. So truly, I think that's where the future is, probably.
It is, because we have to remember, I mean, nobody likes to spend money on a jail, right? But we have to realize these folks that are in the jail, these are members of our community. These aren't people that are being farmed in from some other part of our nation. These are our community members who made choices, you know, whose behavior brought them into the jail. But they're still members of our community, right? Our kids go to school together. We might go to church together. We might work alongside each other, right? We have to realize that this is all part of making stronger communities, and the jail has a role in that.
Yeah, and when they come out of jail, maybe they'll be thinking, you know, I could do this differently, or I could work that job, which I'd never considered.
Right. So that's really the big picture goal.
Anything else we've missed?
No, I just, you know, if you know, anybody, again, any words of encouragement to your county board representative, let them know that yes, this is a tough decision. This is substantial, but it's long overdue. It's time. It's time that we do this.
Okay, good. Well, let's talk about a few other things. I've noticed, and of course, as everyone has, the tragic situations where people are in a mall or in a school or in a grocery store, and a active shooter comes in and starts shooting up the place and killing people and injuring people. How is Kewaunee County handling that, and how specifically is your department working with that?
You know, you've got two pieces to those tragedies. You've got the proactive and the reactive. So reactionary wise, the best we can do is plan, collaborate, and make sure that our responses are coordinated and effective. And that's a lot of the work that we're doing currently. We're actually, as we speak, down in Kewaunee, we've got law enforcement, fire, and EMS all coming together for a drill, for an exercise, talking about what that actually looks like. What does that look like when the call comes out? What does that look like when those fire trucks roll, when those ambulance roll, when law enforcement arrive at the scene, and literally playing that out so we can better respond and learn from it and say, you know, we could have done this better. Maybe we should, maybe we should get more information on this. So that's going on in every one of our communities. Today is actually in Kewaunee's. We've got it pre-scheduled already to come to Algoma, and we'll also be doing it in Luxembourg, Casco. In fact, tonight, I believe, emergency management's actually coordinating one here in Algoma on what they call vehicle-borne threats. So this is another tabletop they're doing. This was in response to Waukesha with what happened in their parade. So unfortunately, we end up having to somewhat react to these tragedies and say, okay, based on what happened, how can we learn? What could we do in Kewaunee, in Algoma, Luxembourg, Casco? What can we do in our communities to better be prepared, heaven forbid, if something similar to Waukesha were to happen? So that's exciting stuff, and it speaks volumes to the first responders and their dedication, and not just react, but to be leaning forward and thinking ahead. All right, let's plan for these things. Let's hope it never happens, but let's plan for how we might respond to them. So that's on the reactionary side. On the proaction side, a lot of this, again, is about building strong communities, making sure that people aren't falling through the cracks, making sure that in our schools these kids feel validated, that they feel valued, that they're not in a place of loneliness or isolation, because that's where these things play out, is when people are in an environment of isolation, loneliness, desperation, then they act out. So if we can make sure that we've got a tight community, that people are connected, we're going to minimize the potential for this to happen in our community. Because when you watch the after action reports time and time again, it was some individual who felt alienated, disconnected from the community they were in. And they lashed out with anger, frustration, fear, whatever it was.
Yeah. Well, I've driven by, schools. I've seen kids on the playground, and you'll see whole group of kids together, and then there'll be one person over here, a small child, or maybe somebody in high school or something like that. And I go, what's going on here? And you can kind of almost see that there's something happening, that this one individual doesn't feel welcome within the crowd.
A lot of that, the work we do is what's called informed trauma care, or the endangered child protocols, where we try to identify things that a child might be going through at home that may manifest itself in the school. So this idea of a child maybe being by themselves, isolating themselves, it might have nothing to do with the school environment. They might have just have a real dynamic family environment that is spilling over into the school. So our ability to communicate and connect with school staff and the school district to say, hey, this is what we're seeing after hours. Let's make sure that we're touching these kids' lives and keeping them engaged in the school. Because the teachers may not know the backstory. All they see is that behavior. And so it's inherent on us as community servants to make sure we're talking. That, hey, little Billy, he may not be acting quite right today, but you got to understand at 2 o'clock last night, mom and dad got into a fight. And that's now spilling over into today. So there's a lot of neat things we're doing in tearing down those silos of information and sharing with the schools and the staff back and forth, so we can keep kids connected and feeling valued.
So you deal a lot with teachers and with the students,
Absolutely. We've got them all on speed dial. I've got every administrator, superintendent. And that's great. That's the way it should be. That they have me on speed dial. I have them on speed dial. We're always talking, because it's in those gaps. It's in those gaps where these tragedies play out, where somebody had a piece of information that this group didn't have, and it fell through the gap. So we've got to always be talking.
And I think one of the wonderful things about living in a small county like Door County or Kewaunee County, where you can deal with this one-on-one and much closer relationship than, say, someone in Milwaukee or Chicago or Minneapolis or even Green Bay might see a totally different situation than what what you're able to see here.
Oh, absolutely. When we do get people that come in and they want to maybe raise a little havoc, or they want to be able to just do whatever they feel, and we're right on them, they're like, man, this community, this sucks, right? Because we can't do anything. I'm like, yeah, you're right. Right? You're absolutely right. And that's our job. You start doing things outside the norm, you start violating laws, you start acting that way. Yes, you are going to get our attention, because we're lucky enough to have a safe enough community that those little things still raise flags, that we're not in a large community where we just don't have the time. And I hope we never lose that. I hope we always have the ability to focus and put out the little fires, to deal with the little things before they become big things.
And it seems like you're always supportive of people as well.
Right.
Even though they may have done something stupid, it seems as though, that you're out there to help them along.
Right, because right, I tell the kids all the time, there's a very thin line between that side of the jail door and that side of the jail door. And it doesn't matter education level. It doesn't matter how good you look. It doesn't matter how much money you have, right? It's literally good decision, bad decision. I booked a lot of highly educated people into that jail. I booked a lot of really good looking people in that jail. I booked a lot of rich people in that jail. So none of that exempts you from the consequences of bad choices. And that's what I think our young people need to understand, just good choices.
Yeah.
You do the right thing and you're going to be fine. But we just, that's what gets people in the rocks.
Yeah. And one more thing about the active shooter training. Do you go to specific locations? I mean, like to a school or a local store or the courthouse or something?
A lot of it
like
has
that?
to do with availability. Like today, the availability, we're down at Lake Haven. So we're down at that building down in Kewaunee because of the availability of different facilities. If we can, we always like to use schools. A lot of it has to do with, the different corridors, the dynamics of the building. But of course, we also want to make sure that we're ready for response to those. Those are our most vulnerable, our most precious assets in our community are what's in our schools. So we want to make sure that that's first and foremost. But a lot of times we will transition and we'll pivot over to maybe a business. We've been at Label, we've been at Townsend, Cape Townsend. We've been at different businesses as well if they allow us in. And so go ahead and use our floor plan so you can better drill on different dynamics of a given building.
Yeah. I imagine it's rather frightening, isn't it, to go into those situations? Or is it something that you're more accustomed to? I mean, me as a civilian, I look at it and I go, boy, that looks kind of scary to me. But I suppose you're trained in that.
It's what it is. It's training and then training, and it's the mindset. We typically are actually at our best at those high risk levels, right? That's usually where we actually thrive, is in high level risk. High intensity situations is where we really shine, and that goes into a whole nother issue of law enforcement and wellness. Is that when you put somebody into those heightened levels of vigilance and response over and over again, we've got to also help our officers decompress and come off of those, right? Yeah. So no, our natural inclination, our absolute instinct is to go towards wherever the danger is. I don't give it a second thought. Whether we're off duty or on duty, whatever it is, it's like, okay, that's where I'm needed, and we just go towards it. Yeah. And that's fortunately what we've literally, trained and grilled into our law enforcement as a culture, as well as your firefighters, paramedics, EMTs. They all have that same servant mentality that that's where I'm needed. And no matter what I have to walk through to get to what I'm needed, I'm walking through it. And that's what you saw on 9/11. You saw those people running towards what everybody's running from.
Yes.
The big thing is that in order to make sure we can sustain that, we need to be on the backside, strengthening the resilience, so that these constant interactions of high intensity, high vigilance, high risk, that's all good. That's what we have to do. But now when that's over, let's make sure we have the skills to come back off that, to decompress.
Go back to the family.
Right, because you can't stay at that heightened level of vigilance as a human being. We weren't meant to be there all the time.
No, for sure. Couple of other things we should talk about. The fair is coming up fairly soon. Do you get involved with that and the safety and so on?
Absolutely. So we keep a contingent on the grounds as far as law enforcement. We've got great response protocol. We work with the fair board as far as what that looks like, how are we going to maintain communication, even emergency. What happens if a storm ends up coming through that area, high winds, things of that nature. So we're always talking about how we can respond, how we can interact. But the beauty of that fair, you put that many thousands of people in that confined area, and I can honestly tell you that after that 4-day event is over, we will have hardly any calls generated out of that. It's just it absolutely amazes me when I sit down the next Monday and I look at all the calls throughout the weekend. The actual fair itself, very minimal. People are there with good intentions and a great spirit, there to support the community. And even in the after hours when the bands are playing and and people are having some consumption going on, still that we have such an amazing community that can come together in such a concentration
Yeah.
and really not generate any sort of law enforcement activity.
Because you'd think that, people tend to drink a little bit at those at those events, but maybe they're out to have fun.
Yep, and the big thing is to have that presence. I mean, I watch my deputies as they're walking around, and they're not just standing there, looking at the crowd as if they're, surveilling them. They're interacting. I mean, they're all laughing with whoever's there. People are walking up to them. So it's this whole idea that we're doing this with them, not to them, not for them, right? Everything that we do in law enforcement, we're doing together. It's a with thing, not a to thing.
Yeah. Do you think that's true in all departments, or do you think you're kind of unique? Not unique, but that yours is different than if you were in a large city or somewhere else?
I think that in your larger venues, of course, they don't have the choice. I mean, they're dealing with threats. They're dealing with risks that, we don't have to even consider. I mean, we have to keep one part of our mind thinking about the what ifs, but we're fortunate enough to say, you know what, there's a good group of people. We'll be on our, we're going to be on our wits end here, but we're not going to have to be really that high level. But I've seen it when I've been up in Door County events. You see the deputies up there, it's the same. Or you go to another smaller community. When you're at a larger community, I respect what they have to do because they're dealing with dynamics that we don't have to. So they've somewhat lost the luxury to have that kind of integrated reaction and involvement. They've almost got to keep a step back because they just don't know where that threat's going to come from.
You don't know who's going to walk up to you and do what.
But again, I think it's everybody's goal, large department, small department. That is always our goal in law enforcement, to have that community policing flavor, that we don't want to be seen as an occupying force or as just a security contingent, that we're seen as that public servant, those community policings.
Yeah, to get in with the public and to walk around and to be communicating.
Yep.
Okay. And a lot of departments now have gone to body-worn cameras. Do you guys have plans for that?
So we have had dash cams for years already, right? And they've been very valuable. We've been holding off just because of the financial impact. So fortunately, about a year ago, we were able to write a grant that was able to support us in our transition into body-worn cameras. And it was more than just the cameras. What we had to plan for was, how is all that data stored and managed? Because all that data has to not only be with law enforcement, but at some point in time, it has to follow our reports up to the district attorney's office. Then from the district attorney's office, that information needs to be shared with defense counsel. It may have to be shared with other stakeholders, other partnering agencies. So how do we have all those massive amounts of data? How do we manage and facilitate the sharing of it, the movement of it, the use of it in our criminal justice system? That's really what took us the greatest amount of time, because all these systems had to integrate. So the DA system had to integrate with our system had to integrate with Algoma and Kewaunee and Luxembourg police departments, because we're all using the same record management system, and all of our stuff has to go to the same district attorney. So it was a lot of coordination, but we literally kicked it off as of yesterday that we started issuing the cameras. So we're just walking it forward, getting them on the deputies, and starting to work through any of the problems that we might have.
How do you think that will affect the deputies? Do you think they'll be, oh, I've got this camera on my head.
Right, and typically it's mounted right on the torso.
On my chest.
It really hasn't. I think in the early days there was this sort of paranoia, this fear of, oh man, I'm everything I do. But what we've seen in the dash cam reality, and now what of course I know we're going to see in the body cam, is that it supports the officer. We have professional men and women, right? The men and women that are working for our agencies are professionals. And the existence of these cameras are not to hold them more accountable. It's to really validate the professionalism of those men and women. And that's what we've seen play out when we do get a complaint where mom and dad come and say, your officer is picking on little Johnny. There's nothing I love better than bringing in the laptop, opening it up and saying, here's the video. And they look and say, oh boy, I guess Johnny didn't tell us the truth.
Little Johnny.
Right. So, and that's how it's played out. It's never been like, oh boy, the officer did this. In our environment with Kewaunee County, in our community, it's always been the officer did the right thing. The officer was absolutely justified and valid in what they did, and maybe we need to look at the other parts of that interaction outside of law enforcement. So I'm optimistic that it will always serve to validate and to support our men and women in law enforcement.
Okay. Well, we've talked about the jail, we've talked about active shooting, we've talked about the fair and body-worn cameras, and I think I've run out of material.
Well, wonderful.
It's been wonderful, and we made it for another half hour.
Well, there we go. Well, I appreciate coming on.
It's great to see you,
Yes.
Matt, as a friend and as the sheriff as well.
It is an honor. It is an honor.
You do a wonderful job. Thank you. We've been speaking today to Matt Joski, who is the Kewaunee County Sheriff, and we hope you'll join us when once again it's time for Your City, Your County. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great day. So long, everybody.